Hello and welcome to this webinar, Building Confidence and Value with Customer Journey Mapping. My name is Steve Hardman and I'm from Gruyter Publishers, and I'm very pleased that you've been able to join us today. This webinar will be led by Ian Golding. Excuse me. Ian is a global customer experience specialist and an author. And the speakers will include Jerry Angrave, who is founder and CEO of Empathyce. And Jerry is also the publisher of the Journey Mapping Playbook, which we're very pleased to have published. Before I hand over to Ian, I'd like to say just a few words about De Gruyter. De Gruyter is based in Berlin and is one of the oldest independent publishers in Germany, with a history dating back more than 270 years. De Gruyter is a leading publisher of academic content, and we also publish books for business professionals as well. In total, we publish more than 1,300 new book titles each year, and we also publish journals and digital products. As I've mentioned, we're very pleased to publish Jerry's book, and if you'd like to buy a copy, you can do so from degruyter.com or from your usual bookseller. So that is the end of the commercial, and I'll now hand over to Ian.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Stephen, and thank you for making this possible today. Thank you to all of you who are listening to this around the world, either live or to the recording on degruyter.com. It is such an important day to almost officially announce the publishing of this very important book. This very important book that has been written with a little bit of blood, sweat and tears by my peer and very good friend, Jerry Angrave. And it's so important that he is sharing his huge amount of expertise with the world on a subject that is so vitally important, but so misunderstood by many around the world. We are also hugely honoured to be joined by more peers of ours, the brilliant Sarah Corney and the equally brilliant Nathalie Wickens, who are going to also share their experiences of journey mapping and why they believe it is such an important principle as well. And I'm going to ask them to say a little bit more about themselves in a moment. But why do I keep saying that this is important? I'm not saying it because Jerry's a nice guy, although he is one of the nicest humans on earth, but that's a different matter. I'm saying it because customer journey mapping is, in my opinion, one of the most important competencies of all when it comes to the profession that customer experience has become. And over the last 5, 10, maybe 15 years, organizations have got very overexcited about customer journey mapping, and they are mapping journeys until they are coming out of their ears almost. And there are lots of beautiful looking pictures adorning walls of offices all around the world that purport to display the customer journey. But are they really? Are those journey maps really representative of what the customer experience is? And do they even know what to do with the journey map? And so it's really important that we're able to take time to stop and reflect and to really understand, well, how should we be mapping the journey? Why are we mapping it? And what is it trying to achieve? So with that as the background, let's do a little bit more introduction, flesh on the bones. So the first thing I'd just like to do very quickly is do a brief elevator introduction to Sarah, Nathalie and Jerry. So if I start with Jerry, so he can say hello officially, Sarah, I'll then come to you, and then Nathalie, I will come to you. So Jerry, do you want to give the official overview, but don't tell anyone why you wrote the book yet?
Right, okay, thank you, Ian, thank you, Steve. Thanks everyone for joining this webinar. And as Ian said, it's journey mapping is at the heart of customer experience, at the heart of what I do as a profession that I love. So I'm Jerry Angrave. I founded Empathyce back in 2012. It's a customer experience consulting and coaching organization. And I work with organizations in lots of different sectors, in aviation, professional services, in utilities. The point being that journey mapping works for any type of organization in any sector, and it's been an absolute privilege to write the book and share the thought. We'll come on to that, but kind of share what works and doesn't work from what I've seen as being part of Empathyce. So thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jerry. Sarah.
Yeah, hello, welcome everybody. My name's Sarah Corney and I'm the head of digital experience at the CIPD, and prior to that I was the head of customer experience at CIPD. And we are the Chartered Institute for Personnel and Development, which is the professional body for people who work in human resources and learning and development. And I'd just like to say one quick word about the book. So Jerry was instrumental in helping us to introduce customer experience at CIPD and in kick-starting all of our customer journey and customer experience efforts. And he's been a friend and a mentor to me in that sort of CX journey. And it's just so fantastic that his wisdom and his friendly advice is now available to a much broader audience in the form of this terrific new book. So well done, Jerry.
Thank you.
He is the nicest person on earth, isn't he, Sarah? Thank you, Sarah, and let's come to Nathalie.
Hi everyone, welcome. I'm Nathalie, I'm the Customer Experience Manager at Cardiff Airport. We are a fairly new department within the airport, but I've been here for about 5 years and have about 15 years of kind of customer-centred job experience, service. We connected with Jerry about a year ago, I'd say, with the journey mapping exercise, and completed it about 6 months ago. So it's really fresh within us, and he's been really instrumental in helping us really embed customer experience within our whole team, which has been really fantastic.
Fabulous. So we've got 2 practitioners who are applying this or continue to manage journeys. The man behind the method. Let me just come to you, Stephen, before we get started, because whilst obviously you introduced yourself so people know you're from the publisher, can you just share with everyone, why did you choose to publish this book in the first place? Because I think it's quite good context. Why would a publisher think that this is important enough to publish a book? And just before you answer, while you're considering your answer, to everyone listening in, I do encourage you to ask questions. Now, the way to ask a question is to put your question into the chat on Zoom. And I'm constantly monitoring those questions. So please do ask questions and I will interact with those as we go through the session. So Stephen, why did De Gruyter choose to do this?
Okay, well, thanks, Ian. As I've said, De Gruyter has a very strong history and tradition as an academic publisher, but we've been publishing books for business professionals now for some years. And we've been looking at different formats, different publishing formats, and we decided to publish some titles in the playbook format. And Jerry's book is one of literally the first titles to be published by us as a playbook. I imagine most of the people on the call are familiar with playbooks, but just in case you're not, there's 3 things to say about them. Playbooks are usually, they're very focused on a particular business process or method, but also they're published in a landscape orientation as opposed to the traditional portrait orientation. But they're also highly visual. They have lots of images, and the very nature of journey mapping and journey mapping workshops, we felt, lends itself very much to this format. But to say a bit more about why a book on customer journey mapping, there was a report from the CXPA in 2018, and that indicated that 67% of CX customer experience professionals across the world have used or are using journey mapping in their work. But there have been hardly any books, probably no books published as in terms of a practical guide on the subject. There are lots of books on customer experience, and many of these books provide some limited coverage of journey mapping, but there seems to be a yawning gap in the market for a book which is dedicated to journey mapping and serves as a practical guide. And finally, we felt that Jerry was an ideal author for this. I mean, Sarah very kindly introduced me to Jerry. And Jerry is one of the leading practitioners in the UK in the field, and he seemed to us to be the ideal candidate to write this book.
Fantastic. Well, that is a brilliant reason why we do this. And what interests me most is that so many people do it, but there's never been any sort of either academic or business related perspective that has documented how to do it, which may explain why so many are not doing it particularly well, which we'll come on to. So Jerry, having heard that, which I'm sure you've heard Stephen talk about it before, just share with everyone, did you do it because no one else has, or was there another reason? Why did you decide to be the first specialist in the world to put into writing how journey mapping should be done?
It was partly because Sarah was nagging me to, but no, it was partly because of exactly what you've talked about, Ian, and what Steve talked about. There's a huge amount of discussion, quite rightly, about customer experience, a huge amount of discussion about customer journey mapping. But the reality that I was seeing, and you'll have seen this, Ian, as well, when you get into organisations, is that the reality was that the journey map was actually a process map, or it was done as a single project and it just didn't go anywhere. So the thinking behind the book was to provide, particularly for those people who are new into the role. So again, because of the exponential growth of customer experience over the last 10, 15 years, I see a lot of people transitioning into customer experience roles from sales, from marketing, from customer services, and being told, right, okay, you've got a customer experience role, you better go and do some customer journey mapping. And there was a lack of anywhere for them to go to say, okay, right, what's the manual, what's the instruction manual for this? So that was the impetus for the book, was just to kind of put everything that I've seen and learned about what does work and what doesn't work into a book to help them prepare to set up the sessions, to then facilitate the sessions, because that's the key thing about keeping it on track during whether it's online or in person, and then, but crucially then, well, how do we use it to create value? How do we make sure that the journey mapping is strategic? How do we make sure it's effective, and how do we make sure it's influential? Yes. So that those people who are relatively new to role have the confidence, and then they have the credibility to go and talk to the rest of the organization to say, look, here's the facts and the evidence for making change, for stopping this, for taking out wasted costs here. We'll talk about the benefits in a minute. But yeah, so it's kind of it was really to give those people who are kind of heading into journey mapping a kind of step-by-step guide. It's pretty, have to be honest, it's pretty low tech, because I'm no tech, low tech type of person. So it kind of strips back everything to its what are the building blocks of running a journey mapping program effectively.
So you say it's low tech, but you know that you and I agree that the secret to the success of journey mapping is to keep it simple. But unfortunately, organizations radically overcomplicate this. So keeping it simple is not that easy, which is the ironic thing. And so let's see if the proof is in the pudding. So Sarah and Nathalie, I'm about to come to the two of you. Having heard what Jerry has just said, why did you need to map the journey? What was the start of your approach to this? Was it because Jerry ordered you to and said you've got to map the journey, or how did you go about doing it? Why did either the CIPD or Cardiff Airport need to understand the journey? So Sarah, do you mind if I come to you first?
Yeah, so for CIPD we knew we had to do a digital transformation exercise, and we also knew that the digital transformation itself is not transformational unless you take a customer perspective to it. And so it was sort of originally it was conceived as part of that digital transformation exercise, of which we're still in the middle of, right in the middle of it. And so it was thinking about, okay, so where do we start? And we thought about, what were the most important journeys to us, but also what was a relatively straightforward journey, because some of our journeys are big and quite complex. So what was a good place to start? And made a connection with Jerry, and he helped us. I mean, he came in and facilitated our first journey mapping workshop, but it was also always conceived of as a training exercise as well. And Jerry was very clear from the beginning that it wasn't, he wasn't going to come in as a consultant with his sort of super consultant cape on, do his thing and then, fly out again. It was very much about embedding that muscle and that capability in the organization itself. So it started the process, and it was a good way to start as well, because it enabled us to sort of demonstrate customer experience in action with a big group of people who then became champions for the process and for customer experience more generally. But it also meant that we could show, one, the amount of effort involved, but also the benefits in very real and tangible way, because they were associated with a particular journey.
That's really interesting. Not the thought of Jerry in his underpants and cape. What's really interesting is that it's about, even though Jerry was an external specialist that helped you to understand how to do this, but actually it was as much about giving you the tools and skills so you can continue doing it yourselves, which I suppose again is one of the premises of producing a book, because actually this is something that you should be able to do for yourselves without having to rely on, spending huge sums of money with big consultancies coming in to do it to you. So I think that's really interesting. Nathalie, again, it's very possible you've not heard Sarah say that before, but does that mirror your kind of experience? How did it start?
Yeah, definitely, very much. We, as I said in the introduction, we're a very young team, me and my colleague Sarah, different Sarah. And we were given the task of setting up the customer experience department, of suddenly doing it all. And one of the things that Sarah was tasked with was to get the customer journey mapping sessions started and involved. And she engaged with Jerry to do that. And for us, very, very similar to Sarah, so that we could get, to get a really good view on who our customers were, where they are. We've got some very, very loyal teams at the airport that have been here for a long, long time, and we really wanted to engage with our teams a lot more. So again, like Sarah saw, this very much as a training exercise as well, to be able to engage our teams with each other, to engage our teams with the customer and who they were, so that they could really start understanding who our customer is. A lot of our teams say that they understand who our customer are, but they don't. And we really saw this as a fantastic tool to begin and continue learning who that was. And we definitely see that customer journey mapping becoming a yearly thing. Yes.
You're saying all the things that make me feel very good about customer journey mapping. Just as an aside, one of the interesting things that I'm observing around the world at the moment is that many organizations are mapping journeys by channel or by product. And it's very interesting what you say, Nathalie, that your starting point is, well, actually we need to know who the customer is, because a customer doesn't interact with online at Cardiff Airport, they interact with Cardiff Airport. And the problem is that if we think of customers as channels or products, we miss the interaction. And so not enough are mapping the omni-channel journey. And that's just one of the mistakes that organizations are making. So I don't want this to sound as though we're being too negative about the way people are going about this, but we know, especially Jerry and I, that so many are struggling with this. They don't know what to do with it. I want to try and explore what other things go wrong, what makes this so difficult. So Jerry, do you want to kick off with, what in your huge experience tells you are the common challenges that people are facing when they're trying to do this?
Yeah, there's quite a long list, unfortunately, which is partly why I wanted to write the book, to say, look, you will come across some hurdles. There will be some unexpected curveballs thrown at you, but that's why the preparation is so key. I think some of the problems that we will encounter are it really raises some interesting questions. It holds the leadership team to account. For example, an organization might say it wants to be, it has this vision to be offering the world's warmest welcome, which is great. The journey mapping can really show where that's not actually happening. And you can then go back to that leadership team and show them examples. Well, if we are serious about offering the world's warmest welcome, then why have we got overflowing bins? Why are we not providing shelter in the rain for customers who are waiting outside our store because they can't get in now because of COVID, all that sort of stuff. So it really shines a spotlight. So that leadership engagement is so key, and that's one of the big hurdles, because when we're trying to set up a journey mapping program, you need people from across every different part of that company, and some of those people are going to be very skeptical stakeholders. So I'm not going to release my head of or manager to go and sit in a workshop for half a day or an hour or a whole day, because I don't get it, I don't understand it. So the leadership engagement can be a big hurdle, but again, it's a conversation that has to be had, and that's why journey mapping is so powerful, because without those conversations, you're never going to become customer centric. Yes. So there's a number of kind of barriers, but it's about planning well, preparing, getting the scope crystal clear, because if we try, as you say, if you try and just map the journey of a particular channel, then there's a risk we miss a big opportunity. If we try and map the entire end-to-end journey, that can be too dilute, and it can become quite overwhelming. So that's why it's worth taking time out at the start to really prepare whose journey are we looking at, and what are they doing. Be really clear and accepting that there's going to be, it's not just one workshop. There is going to be a whole program which will just run from now for the long term, just a series of workshops. But you have to start somewhere, and I think to overcome a lot of those hurdles, just to start small, start with you and a group of friendly colleagues who get it and understand it. Do a bit of journey mapping, and I've always said, you guys will have heard me say this umpteen times, if you do nothing else in the name of customer experience, give customer journey mapping a go, however rudimentary it is, however basic it is, and see where it takes you, because you will not regret it. It's as you said, it's an incredibly powerful force. And just to, if I may quickly just add to what Nathalie was saying, the other thing that we did at Cardiff was to overlay a physical walkthrough of the buildings, the terminals, so you get an even richer insight. And that just kind of wouldn't happen without using journey mapping as its framework. So yeah, it's an incredibly versatile tool. It doesn't come without its challenges, but once you get into it, you'll find ways of navigating around those challenges.
The physical walk was so important, as well as as you said the phrase, the light bulb moments of some of the team members that did it.
Yeah,
they're going,
another challenge.
Oh.
So just as an addition to this, so before I come to you both to ask you your perspectives on the challenges, the things that go wrong, the physical walkthrough was so important, but we can't do that now. And for the last 9 months, obviously we've all been grounded. We're all now doing this through screens. Again, just before I go to Sarah and Nathalie with the challenges, Jerry, are we still able to do this? Are we still able to effectively map a journey in this virtual world in the same way that we used to?
Yes, is the short answer. There's a few caveats, obviously, but there's no reason why we can't carry on our journey mapping. Because if you think about a lot of the benefits of journey mapping go beyond just having the sticky notes on a wall and making kind of incremental, let's fix this, let's fix that. Some of the kind of the hidden benefits of journey mapping are about bringing people together behind a common cause, collaborating. And Sarah, when we were at CIPD, people were saying, this is the first time we've ever been in a physical room together with people from the entire customer journey. Things like that happen. People learn about their own business, that they find out what their colleagues do, what their role in the overall business. So yes, it takes a slightly different approach, using a combination of something like Zoom or Teams and collaboration tools like Mural and others are available. But it's very much, you have to adapt. You won't be doing a full day session, and as you say, very unlikely that we'll be able to walk through the physical premises. But that said, there's no reason why you should put off the journey mapping. If anything, now is more important than ever, because even if your products and services and your processes, even if they have still stayed the same, your customer journey of those products and processes will have changed. People's fears, hopes, needs, expectations, they will have all changed, and therefore the journey will have changed. So yeah, doing it virtually, very much possible, and very much encouraged.
Ian, if I can come in there, it was an interesting quirk of fate in a way that when Jerry was writing the book, writing the manuscript, COVID hit. So at the start of the process, I think Jerry was writing very much as journey mapping as being a physical activity process. And then COVID hit. So he responded to that and provided some content in the book about journey mapping in an online environment as well. So that was sort of quick thinking, really. But so we've tried to sort of incorporate that in the book.
Fabulous. Well, that's brilliant. And Asmi has sent in a question about the challenges of doing this in the pandemic, and I think you've responded to that extremely well. And just for you to think about the response to this, Jerry, Helen Dolphin has asked of your experience of doing this in rail, but don't answer that yet. I'll come back to you to answer that. Sarah, what's your experience of the challenges in doing this? You know, what makes it difficult? What can go wrong?
I think in terms of going wrong, it's a couple of things. So I think you can. It's often a reflection of just excitement, actually, and wanting to do something. But people can sort of jump in without actually talking to the customers. You know, so
sounds so obvious, doesn't it?
Yeah, it sounds so obvious, but you know, it's like, well, that bit's a bit difficult and time consuming. Let's just get going, you know. And I think when you don't do that, obviously, you know, you're making assumptions and second guessing, and you know, you might as well not really bother. I don't think it's not really customer journey mapping. And I think sort of similarly to that, I think another thing that happens a lot, and you touched on it a bit earlier, is that teams will run what is essentially a process mapping exercise and call it customer journey mapping. And really, you know, maybe they'll optimize one or two steps, but it's an internal perspective. It's an inside out rather than outside in way of doing things. And certainly when we first introduced customer experience at CIPD, I remember one quite senior colleague of mine said, "We've mapped all of the customer journeys. Like, you know, you don't have to. It's fine. We'll just show you all of the maps." And of course, you know, what they'd actually done was a lot of process mapping. And I think for me, the biggest challenges really have been around resourcing. I think firstly, resourcing the kind of the journey mapping preparatory work, because actually that is quite a lot of work. It obviously bears, you know, real fruit. You know, it's a big return on your investment, if you want to put it that way. But it's easy to underestimate the amount of time and effort that it takes to investigate the customer and actually the employee perspective and gather all of the necessary artifacts and evidence. But it makes such a big difference, you know, if you can bring the customer voice into the room when you do the journey mapping exercise. And I think also we underestimate the amount of work that the journey mapping will then generate, and so there's a big part about how do we make sure that senior stakeholders understand that and support it appropriately.
Just ironically, I just before this have finished recording a video for that exact reason, because senior stakeholders just don't understand that this is not a one-off exercise. Nathalie, you heard Sarah talk about the challenges of resourcing. Now, obviously, we've all spent time in airports. They're very, well, typically they're very busy places, and there's not a lot of time to do stuff like this. You know, it was resourcing one of the things that you struggled with, getting that sort of cross-functional representation into the room, giving time to do this?
I think we definitely saw that it was always going to be an issue. We started planting the seeds in people's mind about 6 months before the journey mapping started. So we were mentioning it in every meeting, in management meetings, SLT meetings, etc., to try and make sure that it became a part of conversation, reminding people this is coming up in February and March. You need to make sure that you've got teams available. We engaged with the teams really early on for them to tell us when they would have X numbers of staff available. We really engaged with our directors as well to make sure that they made sure there was X amount of people from their pools attending, and with our external suppliers as well that were involved, so our retail teams, things like that. We kind of saw what the issue was going to be in advance. Jerry helped, warned us as one of those, and we've seen it in kind of training sessions or staff engagement sessions anyway before. So we planned ahead to hope and make sure that we didn't stumble on that, and it wasn't a surprise of, oh look, another thing from the customer team, swipe that away. And we made sure that people, to make sure that they, the various managers had said, okay, well, on this date I can supply 8 members of staff. Great, fabulous. Well, that's you signed up. And the pretty much, apart from a couple who had to drop out from operational reasons, we did well.
Brilliant.
Ian, if I might just add there,
preparation. Yeah, go on, Jerry.
Sorry, no, I was just going to say, one of the things that does tend to happen is that these things, if you're starting from scratch, start off quite small, but what happens is people will, in the days when we were doing it inside a meeting room in an office somewhere, would walk past and go, that looks interesting, what's going on there? And similarly, if you're walking through a terminal or premises, other people will go, what's going on? What are you guys doing? And you kind of build up this movement, and people ask to come and get involved in your thing the next time. As you say, Nathalie, whether they are in a customer experience team or a sales team, marketing, or whether they're in our case, the car park team or from the airline or wherever it might have been. It just kind of gathers this momentum. But you kind of sometimes just have to start small and be prepared. But Nathalie and Sarah did a fantastic job at getting people engaged right from the start. So.
Yeah, absolutely, and that engagement is so critical. Jerry, to that question around from Helen about doing this in aviation, but what about rail? And I know that you spend a lot of time in all transport spheres, and obviously now's a very challenging time for all forms of transport.
Yeah.
But I think you've made a comment earlier that it doesn't matter what industry you're in, but are you able to just expand on that?
Yeah, absolutely. The journey mapping is an incredibly versatile tool, and as we talked about, and in the, not wanting to plug the book, but in the book is the framework that you would use to go through that journey mapping. The persona and the experience that you're mapping can apply to any sector, any industry. It could be, yes, it could be in aviation, it could be in rail, it could be someone ordering something online, it could be hiring a car. It could be for employees, what's the recruitment process? The fundamentals of what are the stages of the journey, what are people doing, thinking, feeling, what are we measuring? That framework can apply to any sector. And just rail's a great example. And again, just in the UK, we've got some operators that are literally today having to close down their operations for a few weeks because of lockdown. But the way journey mapping has been used there, the beauty of rail, ironically, is that it is literally a journey as well as figuratively. Just as an example, a rail company that were based out in Eastern Europe mapped their journey, and the starting point was a typical train operator journey. It was book ticket, leave the station, on board, sales and F&B, so food and beverage. It was alighting at the station, and then moving on. So very much, although that was supposedly the customer journey, that was very much an internal perspective. And they reframed it to say, right, let's use journey mapping. So yes, it's about this persona has a meeting request. They've got to travel by train. They need to do some work on the train. When they leave the train, they need to go to an office. And basically the long and the short of it was, having reframed it, the output was they decided if you could just have one ticket that would allow you to buy an Uber. So Uber picks you up from home, takes you to the station, the train takes you to where you want to go, and then another Uber collects you from the station, takes you to the office, and then the return journey on one ticket. That sort of insight came out of the journey mapping because they repositioned it. And anyone who's traveled in the UK, it is getting better, but ticketing in the UK means even if you have one return trip from, say, Cheltenham to London, you end up with 6 pieces of almost identical orange paper. And then the revenue protection manager, who's the train guard, comes around and it's just well, pick a card, any card type thing. So yeah, Helen, absolutely. And yeah, and say all different personas. Accessibility is a key issue again, because you can map the journey of someone who has some form of disability. Those gaps, you suddenly look at the environment in a totally different perspective. So yeah, journey mapping is incredibly powerful.
Absolutely. Now I'm going to come back to Sarah and Natalie in a minute to just ask you about the skeptics. So I just want you to be thinking about that, because Natalie described the fact that we've got all of these. We've done all of this before. And that is a very common response from people within an organization, and there are many eye rollers, as I like to call them, when you mentioned the words customer journey mapping. So I'm going to come to that in a moment. Before I do, Pippa, I will pose your question a little bit later, but Jerry, Lizzie has asked the question about, can I go about doing this by myself, essentially, if I paraphrase? And it's a very good question, because not everyone has the benefit of a big team of people. Obviously, we interact sometimes with very small organizations as well as very big organizations. If someone is a team of one, can they do this themselves?
Yes, absolutely. It's a great question, Lizzie. Thank you. Because what we would always say is, yeah, the more people, the better, because the broader perspective, the better. But if you are on your own, if you are the only person in your organization that gets it, then yes, just sit down with a cup of coffee or a glass of wine, whatever you fancy, and just kind of work through the framework. Take some time out to get your head into the headspace of your customer persona, and then just work it through. And what are the stages of the journey? What would they be doing? What's that proverbial job to be done? What are the pain points? What are their unanswered questions? What particularly now, what would they be thinking? What questions might they have? What issues? What are their motivations? What are their emotions? And yeah, absolutely. And if you scribble some notes down on a bit of paper, yeah. And Ian and I, we both worked with a large a global pharmaceutical organization a few years ago, and there was one guy at the heart of that company who got it, and he pretty much changed that organization round to become customer centric. But it started with him on his own. You kind of create a proof of concept, then you can go out and show others what you've done. They go, oh, do you know what, I really like that, let's can I come and join you? And all of a sudden you start again to build this movement. So yeah, I'm a self-employed. Yeah, I've done the journey mapping for my clients, my customers, and it just really helps. So yeah, it's a great question, but absolutely, if you're on your own, yes, very much you can do your journey.
One just thing to add to what Jerry said, Lizzie, whilst you might feel as though you're on your own on the inside, obviously you've got your customers on the outside. So even if you do map the journey yourself, having walked through it, validate with customers. Talk to as many customers as you can and walk through it with them. And that is all the validation that you are going to need to be able to ensure it's an accurate representation of the truth. So with that in mind, Sarah and Natalie, as I said, there are lots of eye rollers with this. And the eye rollers will be either because they think we've done this already, or because how much is it going to cost? How long is it going to take? All of that standard kind of stuff. How have you dealt with that? What is the best way of dealing with the skeptic? Is there anything you're able to share with the people watching this as to how best to approach it? Sarah, can I come to you first?
Yeah, I think there's probably there's two approaches that we took. One is hearts, and one is minds. And for us, the hearts, we won people over, I think, by doing some videos. So we have a small video production unit at CIPD that's staffed by colleagues who have an interest in video making. So it's just sort of added on to their day-to-day job. And we got them to come in, and they videoed colleagues taking part in a journey mapping workshop and asked those colleagues for their reflections and their engagement and their enthusiasm in the process, as well as the surprises that they were finding during their workshop was really infectious. And we captured that on film. And then we showed those videos in team meetings, and we played them to the senior leadership team. We posted them on the intranet and blah, blah, blah. And they've been really powerful in helping colleagues to understand the benefits, but also just kind of get it emotionally, which has been really good. And then I think also that winning people's minds over. So we make sure that we set, that we take the measurements and the benchmarks at the beginning of the process and before we get started, and then we can show what the improvement projects have actually, tangible results. Might take a little while, but that obviously is very, very important. And if you can show improvements to particular moments of truth or particular timelines or particular CX scores, then that's gold. That's really, really useful.
100%. Brilliant. And Nathalie, your perspective on that?
Yeah, so very similar. I think it's about knowing your audience, really. So our skeptics are from very different areas of the business. So there's a cat. So we know that some of our skeptics like data. So we made sure that there was some real hard, okay, so this is where other people have used Journey Mapping before. This is how it's really enhanced their money, their income streams, or it's very similar to the hearts and minds concept, really, making sure that we really market it in the right way to each of the skeptics and get them on board that way, and also ask them what they want. So, what are you looking to do next within your department? Where do you see yourself going? Great, well, we can help with that by doing this, and we will include that within the journey mapping exercise, and we will ask those questions for you to try and get some answers for you. So it's really, really about kind of winning them over and knowing your audience, really.
Yes, no, brilliant.
Ian, if I could come in a previous company, I took part in 2 journey mapping workshops. And it was a very different organisation, and obviously it helped us understand the user perspective, user experience, but also possibly, I wouldn't say an unintended consequence, but when you have a large organisation, which can often be quite silo sort of focused, and people are coming together from different departments, and when you do the journey mapping exercise and you look at the various touch points, I think it helped understand more the interaction of people within the same organisation, as well as experience of the customer.
Yes, and I think Sarah said the same thing, bringing people together, it just doesn't happen very often. It's funny, we don't even think about it. We sometimes are speaking to people for years and we've never actually met them. So to bring people together is such an important thing. Just sort of leveraging from that conversation about the skeptics, Pippa has asked a question, and it's a very different kind of perspective, in essentially, who should be reading this book? Which I think is a very interesting question, because is this just for a customer experience professional who need the manual to be able to ensure that the method is being applied consistently, or actually does it go beyond that? Is this the kind of thing that Nathalie, if this existed in February or actually maybe September last year, would you have given this to your marketing director, or who is it that this should be going to? And that's to any of you to answer that.
I'll go first, as I guess I'm accountable for the book. It's primarily for people who are who are leading the agenda for journey mapping. For people who are going to do the nuts and bolts of the planning and who want to visualize what it's going to look like. But it's a really good point. What journey mapping yeah, I think I make a point in the book. If you want to, you can just flick to the middle pages, and there's your framework. There you can do your journey mapping. That's what the template looks like. But it's got to sit in a real context, and it's that broader customer experience context, the strategic side of things, that's so important. So yeah, I think, yeah, marketing directors, CEOs, hopefully they'll take away something from it as well.
Okay, brilliant. And Nathalie or Sarah, do you agree? I mean, would you have given this to a boss?
I think maybe discussed it with them as opposed to give it to them,
Okay.
because I think some voices, some minds would have seen that and said, well, why do you need a facilitator in? Why do you know? So I think, yeah, so for us, it was really important that we had Jerry in to help us with the process. But I think, yeah, to talk it through with them as opposed to give it to them.
Yeah. I also think, to Nathalie's point earlier, actually, that it's really good to be able to show those senior stakeholders, you know, the why, you know, why should we do this, and that certainly the book touches on it. But if you can give them some real hard, you know, case studies with success stories and you know, improved revenues and improved customer experience scores associated with them, that's really powerful. But for me, I think, just as I said at the beginning, actually, is this book is a lot like having Jerry holding your hand through the process. And Nathalie and I have both been lucky enough to work for organisations where they asked Jerry to come and help, and we benefited from that expertise and that calmness that Jerry brings, and you know, his huge experience. And I you know, it's been boiled down into a book, and I think that's just invaluable and will be really, really helpful for so many people.
But I think you both make a really important point. It may well be for people in a very small organisation that don't have the opportunity to bring in Jerry, that actually this is the right thing to be able to invest in. But actually the ideal is that they combine both, the written Jerry and the physical Jerry. But I think in answer to Pippa's question, you know, anyone that has an interest in putting the customer at the heart of the organisation should be reading this book, but just be strategic in the way you go about doing it if you are a practitioner, a Nathalie, a Sarah, a Jerry, or a me. If you need that additional support, don't cut off your nose to spite your face, so to speak. So with that being said, I think it's amazing how quickly the time goes when we have this kind of a conversation, and I'm sure all of us could talk for hours and hours about this. When we have a conversation about journey mapping, undoubtedly people will be thinking to themselves, so what? You know, does it make any difference? You know, so you've done all of this, so what? So I'm interested to understand what changed. Now, customer experience, as we know, is a long-term strategy. So when I say what changed, it doesn't necessarily mean something functionally or process related. That might not yet have changed, but has mindset changed? Has behavior changed? You know, how has your organization reacted to the work that's been done, if that's an appropriate question to ask? And Nathalie, I know your situation is extremely challenging because of COVID and so on, so I'll come to you second. But Sarah, how has it changed for CIPD?
CIPD. Well, I think journey mapping was a key part. It certainly it kicked it off, and it was sort of our it was almost like our kind of gold standard project, if you like, that everything else sat around. And one of the first things that we did was have a look at a journey that's around, it's called experience assessment, which is how people can come into membership without doing a qualification. And we made quite a lot of improvements to that journey, but we also showed that understanding your customers' end-to-end journey and end-to-end experience, and understanding their emotions as part of that process as they move through that journey, was incredibly powerful. And what we discovered as we went through it we discovered many things, and there were many improvements to make. But one of the critical things that we discovered was that we weren't aware of people's emotions as they went through that. They'd invested a huge amount of effort and money and time into the process of getting their experience assessment and their membership. And it was something that made people anxious. It made people worried. It upset them if they didn't pass, but also it was incredibly joyful if they did pass. And we sent out communications to customers that didn't acknowledge any of those things. And so that when we actually saw that as part of the journey mapping, it was a really quick win, but actually it had a really big impact. And we found customers came back to us and said, you know, that was really nice that you did that you acknowledged, you know, how I was feeling. So yeah, as I say, that's one small example, but it was part of a bigger sea change of activities that we did and are still doing at CIPD. And I think, yeah, the culture, I think I'm right in saying the culture has definitely shifted. And last summer was about 2 years into our customer experience program, CIPD launched its new corporate values, and we crowdsourced them from colleagues across the whole of the organisation. I think something like 96% of colleagues took part in it. And the most prominent value that people wanted including in our new values was customer first. And that was just, I was so pleased to see that, because it really did say, you know, it really did tell us that there'd been a significant cultural shift at CIPD. So customer journey mapping was part of it, but it was definitely a really key component of our activities.
Brilliant. I'm so pleased to hear that. And Nathalie, I hope it's not too difficult hearing that, because obviously you said earlier that, you know, you did this in February, March, I think, or just before suddenly the shutters came down. So it may be too soon for you to have noticed any change in the organisation, obviously. But, you know, have you seen any kind of effect from the work you've done yet?
Definitely, actually. Our last session was the 4th of March. So obviously we all know the timing of that is not great. But so about 5 weeks ago, I had contact from a manager in one of the departments who were usually quite siloed, and they asked for some customer insights into a project that they were thinking of starting. And it was like, oh, brilliant. So we used a lot of the stuff in the journey mapping from our feedback groups, from focus groups and things like that. But it was to have someone actually come to me and say, we need some insights into this new project was brilliant. Absolutely. Well, and they had some really good turnout on the journey mapping exercise itself. So I'm, you know, assuming, or having not been able to actually engage with the staff members properly, that part of that is, you know, the engagement that we saw from the journey mapping exercise itself.
But I'm so pleased to hear that, and that I'm so pleased for you as well, Nathalie. You know, that work isn't wasted; it will never be wasted, and that you obviously have had an impact. Sorry, Jerry, go on.
No, I just wanted to build on that to say that, you know, the journey mapping, one of the things that it does is help the wider organisation understand what we mean by customer experience, and it really starts to, there's kind of two parts to it. There's the customer experience, which is what your customers experience and you know, on the receiving end of your service, so that the tangible activities. But then the other part of it is the customer experience management side of it. So we know what we should be measuring, what questions we should be asking in the surveys. We know if we need a clearer strategy or a vision for our customer experience. We know if we need more governance in place. And so it really starts to crystallize. So again, you know, going back to Pippa's question or Liz's question earlier about, yes, you might just map a journey on your own in a room somewhere, but that can be a real ember that you just blow on gently, and over time it just takes on a whole momentum, which is hopefully an unstoppable force. It's again, it's a really.
I totally agree. So in the last few minutes, because we haven't got long before we come to the end, I think it's always nice to end a conversation like this with sharing our wisdom. Well, it's wisdom to us anyway, but wisdom with the world as to, having done this either thousands of times as Jerry has, or slightly less than 1,000 times as Sarah and Nathalie have done. If someone said to you, what's the one thing that I must think about when I go about doing this? What is the tip you would give me? So let's change the order up a little bit here, and I'm going to give the final word to Jerry before I pass back to Stephen to close. So Sarah, what's your one tip that you would share with the world?
I think my tip would be to do the necessary research and investigation before you go into that customer journey mapping. It's obviously an investment in time and in effort, but if you can bring real evidence, the real customer voice into the workshop, it's really, really powerful. And you start to make your customers' contexts and their problems real, and you help your colleagues to empathize with the customers, and that's really really key, I think.
I love it. That's brilliant. Nathalie, what's your tip?
So that was going to be similar to mine. So my second tip would be to engage. Just keep talking, keep promoting why that customer voice is so important. Just engage, and know your audience. Really, don't tell the finance director the pretty bits. Tell them the figures.
Yeah. I always say, when it comes to anything to do with customer experience, communicate. You cannot over communicate when it comes to this. So let's go to the master himself, the man behind the book. Now, I know you can't summarize this into one tip, Jerry, but what is the one thing, the one piece of advice that you would give to everyone?
Give it a go, I think, is the and don't worry about perfecting it. Have the confidence that you'll be better off as a result of doing it than not. But I have to say, both Sarah and Nathalie, being really clear about, I know you asked me for one tip, but I think they stole my thunder.
It's your prerogative.
No, but no, being really clear about who is doing what, and these aren't marketing segments. This is not a segmentation thing. This is a persona driven, as Nathalie said, engage, involve, but then just have the confidence that it doesn't have to be perfect. What's in the book is a methodology. There are lots of methodologies around, so I'm not saying this one's perfect, but it is a methodology that you can follow. But just give customer journey mapping a go and see where it takes you.
Fabulous. Thank you, Jerry. And before I pass back to Stephen, I'm conscious I haven't given my top tip, so I'm going to give my top tip now.
I was going to ask you, Ian, it would be wrong of us to miss this opportunity.
I mean, I agree with all of you, and I'm going to have two tips. And as the host of today, again, I'm just going to take advantage of that. My first tip comes back to something you said earlier, Jerry. And that is to ensure that people understand the context. Why are we mapping the journey in the first place? And it's not to create a pretty looking picture. It's so we can drive real demonstrable change. But my second tip is to buy this. And the reason why I'm saying this, and again, if anyone has ever heard me speak before, they will know that I can only speak with sincerity. One of the major reasons that you should invest in this, because if you're listening to this, then you are interested in customer journey mapping, is a word that is in the subtext under the title, the word being practical. This is not just conceptual theory, this is practical, and it is written by someone who has been there, done it, and got the t-shirt. Not only that, but Jerry is the most honest person in the world, and he would not want you to buy this if it was a waste of time. So please do, if you are interested in the subject, buy this book, benefit from Jerry's huge experience and wisdom. You will enjoy reading it, if nothing else, I promise you that. So a huge thank you to Sarah and Nathalie, first of all, for taking the time to join us today. Jerry, a huge thank you for having the courage and the energy to be able to pull the book together. And just to remind everyone how they can buy it, and to close us off, Stephen, back to you.
Okay, thank you, Ian. I would like to add my thanks to Ian as well, to the panelists. To Sarah and Nathalie, you come from very different sort of backgrounds and industries, and you brought some really interesting insights into the conversation, so thank you. Ian, you've done a fantastic job in hosting this, so we're really, really grateful. Thank you very much. And Jerry, you've been a pleasure to work with. You've been a great author, and thank you also for the guest appearance of your cat. That was very nicely arranged as well. And finally, I would like to thank everybody for joining us today, joining this webinar, and I hope that you've taken something away from this. So thank you very much to everyone. Thank you.